Good morning. We're going to give just a moment to let some folks pile in here. We're seeing our audience grow. If you're just joining us, we're just going to wait just a moment for our numbers to stop populating. Good morning, and thank you for joining us today, and welcome to Regulation Navigation with Warren Miller, brought to you by ITS. This webinar series is centered around regulation-related topics that cover high-level compliance requirements and give an opportunity for you to learn something new, validate what you may already know, and ask questions affecting your operation. Today, Warren Miller and I will unpack the 2023 GPAC, the Gas Pipeline Advisory Committee meeting that was on the Leak Detection and Repair, or LDAR, NPRM held last November, right after Thanksgiving. We'll cover what GPAC is, what was discussed in the meeting, and what we can expect to be voted on and discussed in the follow-up meeting coming up next month. Before we get started, just a bit of housekeeping to ensure this experience is beneficial for all of you. This session will be recorded, and as a general reminder, the information and views expressed in this webinar series may be opinion and do not constitute legal advice and should not be utilized as your only source of information. So please review this disclaimer on the screen before acting on any advice given, and seek guidance from legal counsel or other applicable experts if you have particular questions, issues, or concerns. We'll have time at the end of this webinar where you can anonymously ask questions about the topics we discussed today. So please, using the Zoom's Q&A feature, please type your questions into that. We'll address those questions as time permits, or we'll respond to you offline if you ensure you leave your contact information. So in other words, when you signed up for this webinar, if you put your contact information in, we'll know who you are and be able to get back to you. But if not, if you were anonymous in that, make sure in your comment you put who you are, how we can get in touch with you, and we will be able to get back to you. We're now offering 0.1 CEUs or continuing education units that you may be able to apply to your professional development hours through viewing and participating in this webinar. So after the webinar, we'll be sending out a feedback form that you can fill out and return it to us if you'd like a certificate for those CEU credits. Hi, I'm Chris Taylor. I'm ITS Vice President of Learning and Compliance, and with me always here is Warren Miller, Regulatory Compliance Specialist. So I'm facilitating, and Warren is our subject matter expert. Thank you for joining us today, Warren. Let's get going. Yeah. So last year, PHMSA, or the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, conducted its first set of Gas Pipeline Advisory Committee meetings, otherwise known as GPAC, on the Leak Detection and Repair, also known as LDAR, Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, NPRM. So this is a new regulation that is being proposed. It's not in effect yet. It's not a final rule. And Warren and I got the opportunity to be present in that week-long GPAC meeting where they discussed many things. Warren, give us a quick overview of what GPAC is in general.
Thanks, Chris. GPAC is the Gas Pipeline Advisory Committee that PHMSA has utilizes to get feedback on proposed rulemaking. These are people that are appointed from different parts of the even outside the industry. There are 15 individuals that make up federal and state agencies, the natural gas industry, members of the public, and other interest group. And it does exist to give feedback on the proposed rulemakings to ensure that they're technically feasible, reasonable, cost-effective, and practicable. We'll get into the cost-effectiveness a little bit later.
Thanks for the. Go ahead.
You bet.
Yeah.
No, I'm good.
Thanks for the foreshadowing a little bit there, Warren. We'll provide you with a link that lists this membership roster of the GPAC, so you can see the kind of the makeup of the committee. We'll be providing that in an email following this webinar. So, Warren, I believe PHMSA sets the agenda for these meetings, and they were really ambitious with this one, because I think they were trying to cover this NPRM that, by the way, had a historic number of comments, a lot of buzz, this leak detection and repair rule. And another one as well that covered class location requirements. But after 5 days straight, they were only able to get it through about half of LDAR. Do you think the format of this GPAC meeting had anything to do with that, or how did this meeting's format differ from those in the past?
They did adopt a different format from previous GPAC meetings in the past, the ones I've sat in. They provide the language, they talk about it. PHMSA would interject additional information or guidance to the committee, and they didn't this time. PHMSA provided no guidance really until about the fourth day. So they allowed the committee to kind of flounder in some really lengthy wordsmithing discussions regarding this language. Got to remember, they've had to consider, PHMSA's had to consider a historic amount of feedback already from the public comments on the period of the NPRM, and now they're trying to develop the recommendations. And then with GPAC providing their input, PHMSA will also have to make either changes if they choose to, or define it in the final rule why they didn't. They had a week to, and again, like you said, they were going to go after 2 of these NPRMs and then get halfway through LDAR, but they did not finish. Got to keep in mind that this is still only a notice proposed rulemaking, and what they voted on is not the final rule. Can't impress upon you enough. Right now, GPAC is scheduled to meet again March the 25th up in Washington, D.C., and it'll be at the same location it was last time, and they're hoping to complete the LDAR rulemaking discussions. And then they're at some point that they would move forward with the final rule after all of the after the meeting.
How does the discussion of the proposed code language work in a meeting like that? Can you kind of paint a picture for those in the audience that weren't able to attend this or haven't been to one in the past, even though this one, did differ? How do they actually do it?
Certainly, the committee is put together in a U shape with a screen in front of them and the audience that's there. Anybody that wanted to show up, there were screens to the side, and they projected it, the language, the rulemaking language. So this would be what code they are intending and what they put in that NPRM, and then a PHMSA represented read it word for word, just as it was projected on the screen to the committee. And then the committee, the PHMSA then asked the committee about certain points that they wanted feedback on. And certainly the committee took that and ran with it and talked back and forth. The point is to get all of this information on public record before PHMSA makes the rule. The entire meeting is recorded and transcribed. Anytime anyone spoke, they were asked to identify themselves, who they were with, and then there is a transcript that you could find out the specific public and committee member comments that you can read.
And we'll be providing a link where you can find those transcripts if you're interested. It is pages and pages. You can imagine basically every word spoken on microphone for 5 days straight, 8-hour plus sessions or so. And we'll be providing that link in our follow-up email that you'll be receiving. So zooming in just a bit more into the substance of this meeting, now that we kind of understand what it was like, what GPAC is there to do. As you can see on screen, this was their agenda for the leak detection and repair in PRM. Warren, take us through and share with us just a bit how they organize the meeting.
Well, again, PHMSA puts this agenda together. They've already got their PowerPoint presentations. They've already assigned their personnel who's going to be responsible for introducing each section. And as you saw on that list, there was quite the list. Once that was put up and after the introductions were made of the committee, then they introduced the very first subjects. And then they would allow the public, and that would be anybody that was in the room that's not on the committee, to make comment. So there is a microphone set up in front of the committee. Each person would come up, say who they were, who they're with, who they're represented, and then give their discussion points supposedly on that portion that we were talking about. At some point, some of these comments sessions took over an hour. So the committee began limiting folks to 2 minutes. And sometimes that was a rush for some, and some didn't take even 2 minutes. Then the committee begins discussing each point on the screen. And in many cases, the comments back and forth were give and take regarding specific language of that proposed regulation. And a lot of times in the past, PHMSA was just looking for, do you support this? Do you not support it? But this committee, at this time, they began wordsmithing specific language to have in the regulation. And that has typically not been the norm for what GPAC was really being used for.
Sitting in the audience, it really truly felt like a negotiation during especially those wordsmithing. I mean, where it seemed like to both sides, if you will, and there were multiple sides, there were multiple interests, but it really felt like it was a negotiation because every single word, every single little detail really mattered to them, and maybe so. The committee votes on the resolution, on the topic at hand, on what they've wordsmithed. And again, finding if their resolution of that point is technically feasible, reasonable, cost-effective, and practicable. But just to be clear, Warren, while there's a lot of good negotiating and discussion at the GPAC meeting, I think it's important to note that, what does PHMSA do with this language that's voted on and passed by the committee?
Chris, PHMSA does have to, look at it, review it. They can accept it, take a portion of it, or they don't have to take any of it. PHMSA has historically used some or all of the guidance given, again, depending on the rulemaking and, what the committees came up with. But it's again, PHMSA has the final say. And just so you know what we were talking about, as you can see on the screen, I think this screen shows this is what we were talking about. As you can see highlighted, this was the specific language that was discussed back and forth between all the committee members, and they landed on a performance standard for pipelines. And this was regarding the advanced leak detection program for gas distribution. And they were talking about, okay, performance standards for the pipelines, 0.5 kilogram per hour screening survey, and following up investigations of leak indications with handheld equipment, 5 ppm, or leakage survey with handheld or mobile equipment. So that was the detail of language that the committee was getting into their discussions.
And you can see at the very bottom left a little voting box. So after they get all of this on screen, they have a committee member read this entirety, including the little paragraph in the very beginning that includes that reasonable, cost-effective, practicable, technically feasible language. They read this in their entirety, and then they take a member vote. And at the bottom of this one, for instance, this was approved 14-1, where 14 members voted for this with one dissenting. Which sections of the NPRM were discussed and voted on during this GPAC meeting?
Well, again, if the title page, when they first started out, had it broken out. So this was, they talked about operation and maintenance and venting, the leak surveys and patrols, the advanced leak detection program elements and performance standard, and then leak grading and repair. Again, as you can see, that's a huge bulk of that NPRM, a lot of detail. And again, the way the program was, it lent itself to a lot of discussion. We're going to cover these points. In this webinar, we're going to cover those points that appear to be the most important. There's so much information that we can't possibly cover every single vote and proposed regulation. We'll highlight a few, but we'll make the public slides from the meeting available to everybody. It's very important that you read them so you know what direction things are moving. Again, not final rule, but you can kind of see the way the wind is blowing right now with this regulation. Certainly, again, this was meant for working regarding the emissions and the environment, and that's the way this is playing out.
So let's get started with the first one here. What are the high points that were discussed in operations and maintenance and venting?
All right, so we'll bullet these out. It's like I say, I'll try to just summarize as quickly as I can. Under 770, which is a new part of the regulation regarding minimizing the emissions for transmission blowdowns, the committee did propose that there were some non-emergency activities that there should be exceptions for. This would be for like launchers and receivers, blowdowns from work on measurement and regulator stations, blowdowns from maintenance work on compressor stations. That would include the relief systems, blowdowns, and then also any blowdowns that were to conduct immediate anomaly repair and ESD testing. So those were some of those things that were accepted. One of the things that did come about was that they made the statement about sole use of flaring is limited when other options are impractical, unsafe, or result in a lower emission abatement. So operators are going to have to document in their procedures what kind of methodologies what they used and why they use flaring as that sole method. Again, this was the language that they voted on. Under 773, this was regarding, and this is again a new section of the code, is regarding pressure relief devices. One of the things that was there was PHMSA had proposed that in the configurations of any pressure relief devices or configuration that an operator have documented engineering analysis, and the GPAC request PHMSA to remove that. There will be a number of operators who do not have capabilities of having engineers on site, a lot of SME background. There's just a number of reasons why they wanted that out of there. And also talked about removing on-site personnel. So when a pressure relief device released gas to the atmosphere, PHMSA they wanted somebody there there continuously and somebody on site, understanding that some operators may have control rooms or other means of working with that pressure relief device for controlling that release.
I understand there was a lot of discussion in this section as well, in this portion, around repair timelines. Is that correct?
It is. They had a very strict timeline as 30 days on repair, and the GPAC committee recommended to address unless impracticable. Practicable. Sorry, that word's always got me since '91. Again, there may be issues with venting, with equipment, being able to do something, but certainly an operator is going to have to document if they miss that 30-day timeline. Then they also requested the requirement for upstream and downstream isolation valves. So the proposed rulemaking said that you'll have that to isolate a relief device. Many operators, have configurations set up that they would not need that. So again, they requested PHMSA to take that out of that rulemaking.
And I think it's important to note that when we say blowdowns, they have exceptions for smaller releases, but these are blowdowns on transmission lines mainly, and that's an excessive amount of methane released in some current practices, right? It's good to get clarity on these points of where this final rule may be heading. And again, like we said before, don't take action on it yet, except for just being prepared, learning and knowing where this may be heading. We're just scratching the surface here. So again, we'll be sending a link out to where PHMSA has provided all of these voting slides. So that kind of give you, that link will come in the follow-up email. So we'll give you all those resources. Warren, what are the areas discussed in the leak surveys and patrols portion?
So they started out with transmission. First off was the patrols. PHMSA wanted to do 12 times a year, not to exceed 45 days. Certainly multiplying the number of times an operator currently patrols. The committee responded and said they really think a frequency of 6 times each calendar year, not to exceed 2.5 months for class 3 and class 4 locations. I'm sorry. Yeah. Class 3 and class 4 locations. And then patrols 4 times a year, each calendar year for class 1 and class 2 locations. They felt like the 12 times a year was way too much. One of the concerns I had was, okay, we're trying to take care of methane emissions, but we're increasing CO2 emissions by 12 times by what they proposed. So I had questions about had they made those considerations. 706 on the leak surveys, GPAC endorsed the NPR and that was written. So that would put it, pipelines outside of HCAs must be surveyed at least once each calendar year, not to exceed 15. And then if you had pipelines inside HCAs, class 1, 2, and 3 had to be twice a year, not to exceed 7.5 months. And then class 4 would be at least 4 times a year, not to exceed 4.5 months.
Well, that's affecting the transmission lines. What about distribution lines?
So under 723, 192, 723, they came about and said that these for the outside of business districts, GPAC voted for just a 3-year leak survey. And with that, consider the opportunity to use the leak data from DIMP to extend that interval to 5 years, but that would be with regulatory approval. So typically that would be at the state level. But again, if an operator able to show, hey, and it may not be for their whole system. It may just be for a certain part, but be able to ask for an extinction if they're able to show minimal leaks on certain pipes, probably. And then they talked about considering an alternative interval for indoor piping and make that consistent with the GPAC discussion. So there was, again, a lot of this is in the transcript that you would be able to read, what that discussion was about. And then additionally, with respect to gas distribution that are known to leak based on material. So this would be cast iron, certain plastics, wrought iron, anything else. PHMSA was asked to consider comments from NAPSR committee members and the public on survey frequencies for that indoor piping. And then again, with those committees and those reports, this may slide that time for that final rule coming out back just a little bit.
Yeah, definitely a perceived delay since they weren't able to get through everything. And again, we mentioned before, about halfway through this NPRM discussion with GPAC at that last meeting. This was really important to some of the commissioners and the operators that commented publicly in states that already have prescriptive and what they described as effective requirements, and they wanted to preserve those. That was a lot of discussion, and I'm glad you touched on that. Leak detection, because this was certainly a major focus of discussion. What was discussed in regards, we're going to move on to the next section. What was discussed in regards to the advanced leak detection program elements and the performance standards?
Okay. Again, this is a brand new section. This would be a program that each operator would have to set up to make their leak detection program better. And so the committee requested PHMSA to consider discussing, again, this discussion that was in the proceedings there, including a risk-based approach to allow the flexibility for operators to choose technologies. The new rulemaking was real specific, and they were saying, there should be some opportunities for different size of operators to choose something that really works for their system. And again, also including those EPA standards and considerations. And then for the performance standards of the leak detection program, the committee addressed, I'm sorry, this would be for not the performance standards of the equipment. They talked about flow rates for screening surveys and sensitivity of equipment to pinpoint the leaks. And then there was a large concern by a portion of the committee regarding the use of latest technology. Again, one of the things that's going to be required is they're going to have to utilize leak detection equipment now, everybody, except for just a couple of small exceptions. And now some of the committee was trying to force to take the very latest, technology that's out there, where some people are just going to be getting their first kinds of equipment. And then the committee also recommended a 3-year evaluation about the review of the program itself, to the adequacy of it. And then PHMSA, it was asked that PHMSA would provide guidance on compliance and with special attention to the implementation by small operators. Again, we're looking at everybody having to have this. So, a small city and, with 3 workers in the state of Missouri has got to be the same as a large transmission company as far as having a detection program, what's adequate for each.
And just to recap, it's like at minimum, it'll be having some detection equipment. It can't just rely on, I guess, in some cases now it's just relying possibly on human smell.
Sense of smell, correct.
Yep. So thank you for that. And we're going to move on to the next section. What did you consider were the main points discussed in this section, which, man, it was, I think, the most popcorn eating time throughout the whole thing, in the leak grading and repair portion of the meeting.
This was a brutal time. I'll just be honest. The most contentious part of the meeting. Some members on the committee believe that every leak that occurs across the country is hazardous, and that they've all got to be repaired. Again, you have to remember the makeup of this committee. Those of us in the industry know that that is not correct. When you've soaked a connection and you've got small bubbles coming out, that does not prevail as a grade 1 leak. But some people believe all of them are hazardous. Some common sense did prevail in a couple of the areas, and the committee took the following actions. So GPAC wanted and this is the quotation kind of from the GPTC guidance, is if it's seen, heard, or felt, that's criteria for grade 1. But they wanted to be clarified to be consistent with the GPTC guidance. That's got Gas Pipeline Technology Committee, I believe. Sorry, there's just so many acronyms. I'm starting to get too old for this. But to include something that might endanger the general public or property. And then the committee also recommended that PHMSA to clarify the meaning of grave environmental hazard, or provide those conditions to modify grade 1 leak criteria to include those leaks greater than 100 kilograms per hour. They threw around some discussion points that made it look like everything was hazardous, and the committee voted to kind of pull some of this back. Regarding grade 2 leaks, so distribution criteria, it was talking about if it's 10 standard cubic feet per hour and a leak extent criteria. So it's, again, one of the following characteristics where it would pose significant harm to the environment, a leakage rate of 10 standard cubic feet per hour or more. And then if the leak has a leak extent of 2,000 square feet or greater, or if there's an alternate method of determining the minimum leakage rate. Then they talked about the transmission and gathering criteria. So the committee added that any gas reading that is not a grade 1 leak that occurs in a pipe body on a line operating at 30% SMICE or greater, or a leak measured greater than established threshold. And they just threw out some numbers, again, trying to have PHMSA make those calls, 5 to 10 kilograms per hour. And then again, that would be considered grade 2 leaks for transmission. The talk about repairs, repairs must be made as soon as practicable, considering impacts to the customer and the environment, but not exceed 1 year. So again, there is that, okay, we've got an issue with the environment, but we're at, minus 30 degrees out here. We can't, put these people at risk, and then being able to justify going not more than 1 year, but if you had to extend it some time, but also making sure you document. The exception is for distribution that are scheduled for replacement and are replaced within 2 years. So this takes into account the grants that PHMSA has provided for some of the small operators to replace pipe. If they've already got pipe in that program and they're going to be replaced within 2 years, they would not have to be, the grade 2 leaks would not have to be replaced in 1 year. That's, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
And then, I'm sorry. And then GPAC also requested that the reevaluation frequency, so this would be going back out and looking at them for grade 2 leaks, would be at a 6-month interval and not a 30-day interval. So they were trying to, again, try not to have people out, every month looking at a grade 2 leak and pushing that out.
Yeah, many members of the public commented that the current 30-day would possibly, depending on the size of the leak, may create more emissions going and checking on it. And I think even some of the members stated, that concern as well. And you touched on this, but we all, I think, Dean, it's good to remember the United States is very vast, right, in different areas. So we have Alaska, and we have areas in the far north that are frozen in ground for so long. There's windows of time where repairs and where these pipes can be dug up, right? And so there's definitely concern around even the practicability of some of these requirements. If found a leak was found at a certain time period, and being able to be complying with the law, but having to deal with the reality of nature, if you will. That covers the recommendations for grades 1 and 2, but let's talk about grade 3. What was determined for grade 3? And for those of you who probably know, but grade 3s are now currently considered the least priority to repair on many systems. Some repair them immediately, just like they would any repair, but some, especially larger systems that have so many miles of pipe, they are just tracked and put on a list to repair one day and check again. But that's the current federal regulations. What was the outcome of this part of the discussion, Warren?
Certainly, before we start, a lot of operators across the country repair their grade 1 and grade 2s. They just don't want to have them. But there are going to be some folks that do have these grade 3 leaks. Some may have a lot, and so it's kind of important to understand. Originally, PHMSA was wanting every grade 3 leak to be repaired within 2 years, and the GPAC asked PHMSA to revise it for the general timeline to be 36 months. So they are pushing that out. The HCAs and class 3 and class 4 transmission, they're looking at a 1-year repair for those. So quite a bit tighter for the transmission, especially in the HCA and class 3 and class 4. Then they went back to distribution. Again, they were kind of back and forth the way all of their discussions went, talking about distribution lines with an emission rate greater than or equal to 5 standard cubic feet per hour. So you can see grade 2 is up at 10. This is at 5. Or if there's a leak extent method equivalent to that 5 standard cubic feet per hour, you have to repair within 36 months unless the pipeline is scheduled for replacement and replaced in 7 years. Kind of different. I don't know how that will actually play out with PHMSA in regulation. I kind of don't think that they'll go by that number. That seems like an awful long time, the way they've been trying to hold everything else and have a general timeline of 3 years and then to allow 7 years. We'll just kind of see how that plays. And then there are they did talk about other grade 3 leaks would be reevaluated at a 1-year interval. So if you do have those grade 3 leaks and you're not going to repair for 3 years, you are going to have to go back every year and look at it, document that you've reviewed it. And of course, if it changes to a grade 2, then you have a brand new timeline. You'll have to work with that. Then GPAC also asked PHMSA to consider prioritization process and the elimination of grade 3 leaks. just, okay, certainly there's going to be some operators that have a lot. And so the grading, they may have to go back and regrade the grade 3 leaks for criticality, again, of a grade 3. Seems like it's misnamed, but that's the way this played out that in those days there in November. Questions were raised as to the necessity of the post repair rechecks for gas distribution. They recommended a number of exemptions to that proposed rulemaking. And again, that will be in the transcript. The last thing that was addressed in the meeting related to the investigation or repairs of leaks following environmental changes. So this is that new caveat talking about, hey, if you've had earthquakes, hurricanes, in certain instances, maybe floods, depending on where your pipeline is, investigating the investigation or repair of leaks following those type of changes. They requested PHMSA to consider a risk-based approach for the repair of grade 3 leaks and provide consideration for local safety and environmental conditions. So again, there was a lot of back and forth discussions, and again, all said and done, we still don't know where PHMSA is going to land, but at least the committee attempted to steer GPAC in. The GPAC attempted to steer PHMSA in areas that they felt were needed changes.
So I guess would it be fair and accurate to say that, and what to expect is currently grade 3s aren't required to be repaired, but you can expect they will be required to be repaired for every operator. And it's just really a matter of how quickly, and very, very different considerations for very different operations.
Right.
We know and recognize this is a lot of information that we've covered so far. And Warren, thank you so much for breaking it down, kind of giving the high level. There's so much more if you have hours to read the transcripts, encourage you to skim through them, at least, especially finding those sections that maybe, and it's, if you're kind of like me, a little bit of a nerd, I got to be there, but kind of an industry nerd, you kind of want to know what are the points of contention? What are the other side? What is everyone thinking? It's really interesting. So we'll be providing that link in case you'd like that resource. Warren, you mentioned earlier that the public comment period in each section, it took a while, sometimes even lasting over an hour, with the committee even breaking out a timer at one point, and timing folks to keep it under 2 minutes. Of all the public comment that we heard that week, are there any particular public comments that stood out to you that you'd want to note?
There were, and it was the same story, just every different section. We talked about the 4 sections. One of the things that required for rulemaking when PHMSA put something out is the cost benefit analysis. And they say for cost, this cost, PHMSA finds it feasible for us to implement this because this is what it will cost the operators. During the comment period, several individuals attacked the cost benefit analysis that PHMSA used to qualify the rulemaking. So they've put it to they put it out on the public that said, we don't think that you justified this rulemaking. And it's estimated that they missed the actual cost by hundreds of millions of dollars. And again, there were some people that had specific numbers of just a certain number of operators that they had polled for a certain part of the rulemaking. So, and it's on record now that they're calling it out that they want the cost benefit analysis reviewed. And I can tell you, if they the questions may arise and may slow this up because they may have to go back and review that, and then it could cause some issues with them in the rulemaking process if they've missed this as it appears they have.
What stood out to me were like you noted, were around cost. Some operators were talking about if the equipment, the prescription of equipment and the sensitivity of equipment was so prescriptive, they'd have to replace all their current equipment, millions of dollars. That would be really, at the end of the day, have to be charged back to ratepayers, and that was very concerning to them. And then also this was really interesting, some of operators who have been running pilot programs with these advanced methane leak detection techniques and or technology, if you will, question the current effectiveness of the technology. And some even brought into question, like, it might not be where everyone thinks it is yet. But they're running pilot programs. I think technology, as we all know, though, gets better and better. We'll see what happens. So what happens next? Let's just talk about the process again. So GPAC met and we got another meeting, but then after that meeting, what happens next with the language that's been approved so far? Or even, I guess, what's happening right now even?
I'm sure, PHMSA's had to, already started doing preliminary work on the first 4 sections that the GPAC has talked about. Again, there's a report that will come from PHMSA, but again, PHMSA will have to look at, okay, here's what GPAC recommended. Do we as PHMSA agree with it? And if not, we've got to justify why not in the final rule. And so it'll be a large document with the justifications. And at the end of the final rule will be that explicit language that will be in code. Again, realizing this will be, amending the language. But they will have to complete that. And then after this next part, it'll be the same thing.
Yeah, and we mentioned earlier that GPAC got through about roughly half of the agenda on LDAR. What do you anticipate to be covered in that March meeting? Let's recap that.
Well, first off, I hope PHMSA goes back to the previous meeting format so they can get through it, because they do have these sections to vote and discuss and vote on. So you've got gas gathering, which I can tell you gathering's putting up a pretty big fight against it. The reporting requirements, LNG and hydrogen portion, compliance deadlines, and then they've got a little area in there with OQ and miscellaneous proposals. And some of those things will play out. And then the committee report itself. Committee will report out. They're supposed to provide PHMSA a final report, again, detailing everything that they've talked about in these 2 meetings. And then that's the official, okay, here's our sign off, whether PHMSA likes it or not. I think they have to wait for that report. Again, that's one of those that I'm not real clear on the way some things read in their bylaws.
It's certainly been a lot to unpack in a short amount of time. Thank you for sticking with us.
You bet. You're absolutely right. It is a lot, and that's why we're trying to keep on top of it for you folks, because again, we're trying to show you the way the wind is blowing. Not that it's for sure that direction, but again, we'll see where PHMSA heads from what GPAC says.
Yeah, thanks so much, Warren. I know we get feedback and encourage y'all to send us a note of how much just sharing some of this information means to you and your operations. And we're happy to play that part. It's time to enter your questions into the Q&A chat box feature here in Zoom. Note that if we run out of time to answer your question, we're going to follow up with you after the webinar, given if we have your information. If you signed up anonymously in your question, please put your contact information if you'd like us to reach out to you and we don't get to your question. We have a few lined up already, so keep them coming in. While we wait for you to get any of those questions you'd like to ask Warren, let's recap our 5 main takeaways for this webinar. Warren?
Can't emphasize enough that this is not a final rule, even though the GPAC has voted on it and recommended language. PHMSA has the final authority and will take that. There's still time to contact any involved association that you know of, APGA, AGA, INGA. If you have something you want heard, certainly you can also go up there and meet. It is an open meeting. Again, the listed group of what will be discussed up there is listed. Don't go out and buy any new equipment until this regulation comes out as a final rule. Some requirements could be really specific, or they may pull back and say, okay, here's the variances that are there. But do prepare for change. This is going to affect operation and maintenance, training, and possibly OQ for most operators. So again, don't jump, but start preparing yourself. And the last, everybody's asking, when will this be a final? The final rule, I don't see it being able to be in place before June 1st. And depending on length of time with the committee report, with anything that falls out from this next meeting, it could push it back on later. And really want to emphasize that there are a lot of other points where PHMSA has proposed regulatory changes. We did not cover them, but please review and be aware that GPAC has approved what GPAC has approved or changed and what will be discussed. And there's a lot to review, and it's all documented in the PowerPoints that we're going to share with you. I do want to emphasize that if you go back to the original NPRM, the last few pages is that specific language and what PHMSA had stated that all of this discussion's about, if you want to refresh on that.
Thank you for that recap, Warren. And like Warren said, in our follow-up email, we're going to send these takeaways, a link to the NPRM itself, and a link to that GPAC transcript and those voting slides. Don't forget about the opportunity for obtaining continuing education credits in that same email. You can use a feedback form there, fill that out, return it to us if you'd like a certificate for 0.1 CEU credits for attending this webinar. At this time, we'd like to talk through your questions. So if you haven't done so yet, again, please enter those into the Q&A feature. We've got a number. We won't get through all of them today, but if you put in your contact information, if you were anonymously signed up, we can get back to you. I'd like to also remind you that this is, again, an NPRM. It's not final regulation yet. But if this has you thinking of your own compliance situation and what the future looks like, especially around management of change, because there's going to be change coming. You're not alone. And ITS has a number of solutions for operator qualifications and operations and maintenance procedure change management. If you're interested in consulting services from ITS, please let us know. Warren has extensive experience working with operators and extensive experience from both sides of the aisle, if you will, from a regulatory and standpoint, and we'll be able to help your operations. Also, if you live and work near Knoxville, Tennessee, or are able to send some folks to travel, or you yourself can travel, Warren will be in Lenoir City on March 5th and 6th to give a regional regulatory OQ training seminar. This seminar will provide valuable insights for professionals at all levels of experience, covering operator qualifications and operations and maintenance considerations. Our follow-up email will also include a link for you to learn more. You can find out more on our website, its-training.com. All right, Warren, to some questions. We'll only get to go through a few of these, but we will reach out to you. We touched on this for a minute, but maybe just to reiterate, just in case, do we have an idea of the timeline when the rule will be adopted or when it will be implemented?
Again, I can't believe it'll be in place before June the 1st. The implementation of it, I'm hoping, is multiple layered. I know that 1 year was the timeline they were talking about for trying to get everything implemented. Again, once that does, you're talking about training, you're talking about procedure changes. There's just a lot. And I believe that PHMSA will have to um, have varying implementation dates.
Do you think that it's important for the industry to represent themselves by showing up to the next GPAC meeting?
Uh, I do. I think that, especially if you're not a member of the association, but you have something you want to say again about these points that are left to discuss, um, I think it it shows you, and certainly it's a great place to network and discuss with the folks that are on the committee, those that are behind that. If they break out and have discussion points and things like that, I believe it's a value, and it would also just show you one of the steps in the rulemaking process if you're not aware of it.
And it also, as we noted, will give you a chance to get on the record with your concerns prior to this becoming a final rule, and for PHMSA to consider that, and for the GPAC committee to consider that. Here's a cool question: What would you be willing to share the difference between practical and practicable? And I guess what do you think, Warren?
Um, Practicable is the term that the lawyers have used in out on this side of the law book. Practical, I believe, is the same word. Um, it, I think it's just to trip people up and how they're saying practical, actually. But I believe it's the same thing.
Yeah, it could be, to me, it might be that practical is it possible? And I don't know what the distinction is, but maybe here's a recommendation. Go look at the two Webster dictionary definitions and maybe you can find, but practical maybe is it possible, and practicable is it possible and can it actually be implemented? Is it realistic? I mean, that may be
That
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 may
could
be.
very well be.
Um, let's see, Warren, do you expect that GPAC will get to the class location rule in their next meeting?
I do not believe it's scheduled. I believe, again, if they stay with the same format, I don't see how they will. Um, I know that was of very important interest in a lot of the people that were up there last time, and they were not happy when the meeting never made it there. And they went there specifically for that. So I've not seen the official public um, um, invitation on the PHMSA website. I should have looked at this morning before we got on here. I apologize for that, but it it may even state what's on there. Certainly go to the PHMSA website and type in GPAC, and it will take you to that section of the PHMSA website, and you can see if that invitation's out.
I think we have time for quickly just one more. Speaking of alternative methods to determine leak grade for grade 3 leaks, who has the obligation to evaluate the method? Is it PHMSA or is it the operators?
The way PHMSA has it in regulation, um, they were very specific, and there's quite a few bullet points about what a grade 2 leak is. The operator is required to grade each leak, and if it meets criteria, then you've got to document what it is. You really want to be very intent and purposeful on how you grade those leaks, and if anything, err to the cautious side.
Thank you for your time and expertise today, Warren, as always. And some of you are asking, will this recording be provided? Absolutely. In that same aforementioned email, we will have a link to our website where we post these recordings, and you can refer back to them and use them as a resource as you may. Thank you to our audience. Thank you for joining us today. And please mark your calendar for our next regulation navigation webinar, tentatively scheduled for Wednesday, May 15th, 2024. We don't have a title yet because we like to make sure that our topic that we discuss is timely and relevant, but it may be a follow-up on LDAR. More to come. Stay tuned, and please stay safe out there. Thank you.